Edge of Fate has come to a close. One of the most tumultuous times I think we as the Destiny community have ever had. And usually I ask, so how'd it go? But I think I just answered it. Gone is the format of seasons and episodes passed with the season and expansion merging into one. There was no seasonal story to consume as a result, with Bungie shifting to a 2-expansion, 2-season cycle year over year, with all of the story happenings coming with the expansion only. Edge of Fate saw numerous big changes to the game, some good, some bad, mostly kind of bad, really, that have just slowly started to improve. Usually I start with the story content in these videos, but the story and gameplay aspect of Edge of Fate ended up taking a back seat to pretty much everything else. Something that I did think was good was the revamping of the stat system on our armor, reworking stats that were either way too good or completely irrelevant to make the space a bit more interesting. Bungie also reworked how stats would be allocated on armor, but only gave people 6 different allocations of stat blocks to work with, which did limit certain stat distributions. People are waiting to see if Bungie introduces more stat blocks in the future, with no news of any additional blocks coming in Renegades. Bungie did also finally add armor set bonuses to the game, and it seems like we'll be getting plenty of those in the upcoming expansion. Set bonuses were also a good addition to the game in my opinion, even if not all of them are super strong. Tiered gear was also introduced, tiers 1 through 5, on all new weapons and armor. The higher the tier, the better the quality, in the form of more stats or enhanced perk options, which I also thought was cool. But Tier 5 gear ended up being a bit too easy to obtain, especially after adjustments that Bungie made to leveling, while gaining pure straight-up levels ended up being too difficult until said adjustments were made. It probably should have been easier to gain levels and much harder to get the higher tier gear, but now it's not really too bad to get either, which for some people isn't exactly a good thing. Some not so good stuff from Edge of Fate was how leveling was executed. The game was slowly pushing away from the power grind over the last couple of years, but Bungie attempted to bring back its relevance by reworking how leveling worked. Gone were most weekly resets and pinnacle gear drops. Now you could just go play anything you wanted, as much as you wanted, and you could get levels, which sounds good in theory. Bungie also wanted to make it a much longer-term goal to hit max level, with only the most dedicated of players being able to hit the cap each season. Others could simply grind as much as they felt like they wanted to and would call it a day after that. And people called it a day alright. A lot of people called it a career on the game, with many people not liking how this plan was executed at all, down to the base concept of having to level. Even the most hardcore of players experienced frustrations, with high scores and A+ grades only giving very marginal upgrades to your power level, sometimes as little as +1 on one armor piece, in some of the hardest content in the game, which could take as long as 30 to 45 minutes per run. And we're talking pinnacle activities or fire team ops, not even raiding or doing dungeons. Not to mention that speedrunning solo missions in a few minutes ended up being the most efficient way to level for weeks, with players running the same solo activity dozens of times in a row. Occasionally, a 3-player activity would be the most efficient, so people would just spam that mission instead, or whatever the mission of the day happened to be. Players felt stuck running the same mission over and over and over, instead of exploring more of what was available in the portal, because the most efficient path was spamming one mission. It didn't help that bonus drops, which were supposed to encourage ping-ponging around the portal, did not drop with any boosted levels until fairly recently, something I still cannot comprehend. Levels were also due to be reset down to 200 every expansion, so you would grind back up to the level cap, which was 550, every season. Bungie is no longer resetting levels back down to 550 with Renegades, although what happens in the following expansion is unknown. The portal was Bungie's way of revamping how people interacted with the game. While veteran players knew how the game worked, people not as tuned in or maybe even brand new players were often quite confused as to how to navigate Destiny. Thus, the portal was made to try to streamline people's experience by getting them into activities a lot faster than they normally would. It has gotten very mixed reviews, with some people praising the simplicity of getting into gameplay, while others noting that it feels like the game has been reduced to a series of menus, even if before the portal there was still a good amount of menuing. Bungie has acknowledged the shortcomings of the portal and leveling, and while leveling has gotten some improvements, the portal will likely be staying for a little while. Bungie did show off a more old-school style menu for upcoming Renegades content, though. They also added and have since completely removed the unstable core currency. This was used to level up gear after level 200, but this currency only dropped from gear that you dismantled that was also over 200. If you ever wanted to infuse a high-level armor or weapon into a much lower level one, the cost could be insanely high, and if you didn't play that much, this could prevent you from leveling up certain pieces of armor in order to make new builds. It was easily one of my biggest points of frustration, as I was someone who did not do the solo ops level grind, and therefore did not have that many cores when trying to make new builds across 3 different characters. Bungie has since deleted this currency from the game completely, going back to enhancement cores as the main way to infuse and level up armor. The Edge of Fate story is the first chapter in the new story being told about the Nine, which is a group that's been in the background of Destiny lore since the launch of the franchise. Lodi is introduced here, a new character who I liked and was generally well accepted by the community. We learned that Lodi and Ikora's fates were manipulated by the Nine this entire time, like the whole franchise, to get them to this very moment in the game's timeline. The emissary of the Nine, Orin, has resigned from her role as emissary, with Lodi eventually taking the mantle from her. The team come to learn that 3, one of the 9 that sent the message for them to come to Kepler in the first place, is actually dead and thinks that the 9 should not exist any longer, now being our job to stop them over this new saga of the game. The Edge of Fate campaign also had quite a lukewarm reception, with one of the biggest complaints from people being that they didn't really feel like they understood what was going on, although I did not exactly have that problem. I thought the story and Lodi were not too bad. I thought Lodi was well voice acted, even if there were a few too many long pauses in his dialogue. I thought Orin was a fun character, and I am intrigued by what could potentially happen next with the Nine. Edge of Fate launched with certain voices being replaced by temporary voiceovers due to a voice actor strike that was happening at the time. The original voices of characters have been placed back into the game, though. Bungie said that they wanted this campaign to sort of feel like a Metroidvania, where you gain new abilities to use on the new destination in order to access new sections and solve puzzles. However, the only time you really got to choose your own path was picking one of 2 sections at the very start of the campaign, and for the most part, the experience was still pretty linear. The puzzle solving and platforming sections of the campaign also didn't really hit any kind of a stride until close to the very end of the campaign, much to my dismay. Some of the side puzzles were a bit more interesting, but never really pushed any boundaries. A big issue with Edge of Fate was that it didn't really have a main activity to interact with as prior seasons and episodes have had. It technically had an activity called the Civ, but you can only access it every so often, and the activity itself wasn't terribly exciting, nor could you see a timer for when you could and could not do it outside of manually checking. There was nothing in the portal to clue you in as to when you could go in. Otherwise, after you completed the campaign and maybe did some side missions, you went straight to the portal to grind, which killed a lot of the excitement of a new expansion because the portal was all content that had already existed for quite some time. When you pair that with the slow and dull nature in which we leveled at the beginning of the expansion, that ended up being a recipe for disaster. A somewhat bright spot for some people was the Desert Perpetual raid. Bungie really stepped on the gas for contest mode, tuning it in a way where only the truly locked in were even able to get close to a single boss kill, much less getting a full clear of the raid. It was also overwhelmingly cheated, with nearly 70% of the top 100 teams having some kind of cheater enabling a clear for their team. This led to a lot of discussion about who the contest raid should really be for. Should it be for the super elite looking for a brutal challenge, or the general player base looking to see if they can actually get through the raid on day one? a question that seems to still go unanswered. Bungie released the epic version of the raid a couple months later, the first time they have done something like this in many, many years, adding some new mechanics to existing encounters, and then making a brand new final encounter, which I thought was one of the most creative encounters the game has ever seen. I did not have high expectations for the epic raid at all, and I thought it ended up being a bright spot during some pretty bad times. For all the times that I have asked for more innovation in Destiny, the raid and dungeon team feels like the group that has consistently delivered and evolved the raid experience, always pushing the experience farther and farther along. Yes, I know, Root of Nightmares, I know, but besides that, they've done a really good job. So after the first month or so, Bungie got to work, doing what they could to make whatever improvements they could make to the game, mostly with regards to leveling. They probably got a hint from the Solstice of Heroes event, an event very early in the season that gave a lot of bonus drops to players, accelerating their leveling and gear tier progress. Leveling and gearing has since been made considerably more chill, although perhaps too chill. I mentioned that high tier gear has been made pretty easy to obtain now, which does have a lot of people wondering what their main chase in Renegades is going to be. Leveling was tuned in a way where even the hardest difficulty in the portal now, Ultimate, is much easier than what Grandmaster Nightfalls used to be, and those were already starting to get kinda easy for people knowledgeable about the game. When Tier 5 gear already drops as easily as it does, and when Tier 5 gear was supposed to be one of the higher end goals in the game, it does beg the question of, what do I chase now? I thought Tier 5 gear would have been a much longer term goal versus just getting to max level, but I don't think that's a cat that can be put back into the bag anymore. The philosophy shift that Bungie wanted to encourage with leveling just did not click with players at all, especially when leveling is still the main way to interact with the game. Leveling should have been chill, gearing up should have been more rigorous. Instead, at the start, both were very rigorous, and now both are very chill. September saw the underwhelming launch of the mid-season update Ash and Iron, refreshing the Battle Pass with new rewards, an exotic weapon, a sandbox update adding a few things to the portal, and bringing in a new activity type called Reclaim, in addition to re-adding the Plaguelands area from Rise of Iron. However, Reclaim was just Overthrow from the Pale Heart, and it takes place in certain areas of the Plaguelands. Not that I had any expectations of the Plaguelands being an area that we could patrol if there was nothing to actually do there. We also did have an exotic mission pop in, which wasn't bad, with a weapon that I would consider mid up until a recent buff, although I would say the mission was mostly on par with other exotic missions that we've had over the past couple of years. Bungie did also try to make sure there was some kind of event going on week over week, whether it was Iron Banner, Arms Week, Heavy Metal, or some sort of week-long benefit in the portal like special or heavy ammo bonuses. We had holiday events as well, like Festival of the Lost, doing their usual thing. November saw Call to Arms, an event that allowed players to compete with each other in high score runs of certain activities in the portal, and also gather loot packages that they can open when the next expansion starts to get a jump start on the experience. I'm happy that Bungie was embracing some sort of PvE scoring competition in the game that actually shows some numbers, although the fact that you needed to be at least 500 power to actually compete meant that anyone not at that power level couldn't really compete for the higher tier items that were available, self included. They tried to fix this issue as best they could, but there were still a couple of issues that should hopefully be ironed out by the next time this event shows up. I took a month-and-a-half long break due to some of the most extreme burnout I've ever had on the game, the longest break I've ever taken in my career. The fact that even I had to step away from the game for that long should be some sort of a clue as to the current state of the game. Not only was it becoming incredibly unfun to play the game in the first place, it was incredibly unfun to be a creator for the game as well. That being said, it is a good time for Bungie to drop their own state of the game sometime soon. So, what did I think of Edge of Fate? Overall, I thought it was fine, although I only really consider Edge of Fate to be the campaign, the side quests, and a couple of other small things. The rest of the time was pretty much business as usual, but minus the usual seasonal flair. It was simply the portal, the entire time. The game is a leveling simulator, and that is only going to entertain people for so long self included. In an attempt to not burn myself out, I actually burned myself out even more, which is crazy to comprehend. Unstable core grinding ended up being my main gameplay downfall. Since I did not grind as hard as other people, I did not have enough of this currency. And because I didn't have this currency, I couldn't do as much build crafting as I wanted to do in order to make the game more interesting for me or make build YouTube content, which just led to me wanting to give up since I didn't want to grind for hours just to get a currency to level up some armor. That was really the main culprit, which then spiraled into plenty of other issues stacked on top, like community sentiment, being in the toilet, and being exhausted at having the same conversations every single day that I was playing Destiny on an hourly rotation. I am not going into Renegades thinking that it is going to be anything more than just more Destiny. I do not think it's going to be some huge turnaround, everyone should come back moment. I do think it'll be better than Edge of Fate as we shift back to what seems like a more traditional campaign experience and an activity that seems like it'll have some relevance for the entire season. I think it'll be fine. Maybe some cool missions, the dungeon will probably be solid, but like I said in my Edge of Fate review, it doesn't seem like something that is going to wake anyone up if they are tired of Destiny. Maybe if you're really into Star Wars, your heart hasn't turned to stone yet, and you're still capable of experiencing some amount of joy, then sure, maybe there's going to be some neat things in there for you. And I will enjoy it as much as I can try to enjoy new content. I will hit 550, I'll play the campaign, I will do all of my triumphs, and then I will figure out what I'm going to do next, as I tend to do. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything is all right, because it is very clearly not. And we'll talk about how I'm feeling about the franchise as a whole in my thoughts going into 2026 video, because I have a good amount that I want to say that is a bit beyond the scope of this video. But it does cover a topic that has been one of the most brought up conversation points over the past few years. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.